The night Marlon Brando finally broke did not arrive with headlines or shouting voices. It arrived quietly after midnight when the phone stopped ringing and the world seemed finished asking anything of him. He sat alone in a coastal bungalow, the kind rented when permanence feels dangerous, listening to the ocean strike the shore like it was counting down. A single lamp cast shadows across unopened scripts scattered on the floor. None of them felt real anymore. Earlier that evening, a call had ended something important. The voice belonged to Nathaniel Brooks, a producer who had once fought to keep Marlon in rooms he was no longer welcome in. Nathaniel spoke carefully, choosing each word as if balance mattered. Projects were being delayed, invitations quietly withdrawn. People were uncomfortable, not angry, just cautious. The call ended without blame, without resolution. When the silence returned, Marlon realized he hadn't argued once. That frightened him. Anger had always been his shield. It had carried him through broken homes, violent arguments, and rooms filled with men who expected obedience. Tonight, it was gone. What replaced it felt heavier. He remained seated long after the call ended, his hands resting on his knees, his breathing slow, his mind moving through memories he had buried beneath success. He thought of Malcolm Reed, a director who once begged him to compromise. He thought of Clarissa Vaughn, who waited years for him to slow down. He thought of promises made to people who believed brilliance could substitute presence. Each memory arrived without mercy, stacking quietly until the room felt smaller. Marlon stood and walked toward the mirror. The man staring back looked unfamiliar. The jaw was still strong, but the fire behind his eyes had dimmed. Fame had not vanished, but it had thinned. Respect had shifted into distance. He understood then that this was not punishment, it was consequence. Outside, cars passed. Somewhere, laughter spilled from an open window. Life continued without him. The realization landed hard. For decades, rooms changed when he entered. Tonight, nothing noticed him at all. He returned to the chair and sat again, staring forward, aware that the night was not finished with him. Something inside had collapsed quietly, leaving no wreckage for others to see. This was not the end of his career. It was worse. It was the moment he understood that survival would now require surrendering the version of himself that had carried him this far. And as the ocean kept striking the shore, steady and unforgiving, Marlon Brando realized the hardest part was still ahead. Sleep never came. Instead, the night pressed forward, tightening its grip with each passing hour. By dawn, Marlon Brando had not moved from the chair. The ocean outside sounded closer now, louder, as if the world had stepped nearer to witness what came next. His phone vibrated against the table, breaking the stillness with sudden urgency. A name flashed across the screen he hadn't seen in years. Terrence Holloway, a fixer, a man who only called when situations stopped being private. Terrence didn't waste time. He never did. Words came sharp and fast. Reporters were circling. Old stories were resurfacing. Contracts were being reviewed by people who never reviewed anything unless they intended to remove someone. A studio lawyer named Denise Carter had asked questions no one asked unless they expected answers they could use. Marlon listened without interrupting, the danger forming clearly now. This was not fatigue. This was threat. Quiet, professional, relentless. He ended the call and stood abruptly, pacing the room. The sense of isolation from the night before transformed into pressure. Every decision he had made suddenly felt exposed. Every enemy he had dismissed felt closer. Fame had once insulated him. Now it amplified risk. The bungalow no longer felt temporary. It felt vulnerable. Another call followed, this time from an assistant named Jerome Fields, his voice trembling, despite attempts to stay composed. A meeting scheduled for that afternoon had been canceled without explanation. Security arrangements were being altered. Someone had accessed private files. Not leaked, accessed. That distinction mattered. It meant preparation. Marlon's pulse quickened. He dressed without care, hands moving faster than his thoughts. Outside, the sky remained calm, mocking the urgency building inside him. He stepped into the street and felt watched, though nothing appeared out of place. Cars passed. Neighbors moved on with their mornings. The danger lay not in visibility, but in timing. He remembered moments when power shifted quietly, when careers ended without announcements. He had witnessed it happen to others, men who were present one day and absent the next. He had always believed talent would protect him. Now he understood protection had conditions. A final call arrived as he reached his car. This one came from Lorraine Whitaker, someone who never spoke unless she'd confirmed every detail twice. Her voice was low, controlled. She told him to leave. Not later, not after meetings, immediately. There were conversations happening without him, decisions forming rapidly, windows closing. Marlon hesitated. Leaving meant acknowledging fear. Staying meant standing still while forces moved faster than he could react. The choice pressed hard. He looked back at the bungalow, realizing the night had been a warning, not an ending. Whatever followed would demand action. He opened the car door, phone still pressed to his ear, as Lorraine said one final sentence that froze him in place. The kind of sentence that changes plans, priorities, and outcomes. Before you hear what she said, make sure you're subscribed and notifications are turned on so you don't miss the next part of this story. Share your thoughts in the comments, because what happens next may change how you see Marlon Brando forever. The drive north felt longer than it should have. Marlon Brando kept his eyes forward, hands tight on the wheel, every mile stretching the distance between who he had been and who he was becoming. Lorraine's words replayed in his head, not loud, not dramatic, but precise enough to change direction. She had told him names, real names, people who once needed him and now wanted him silent, not ruined, removed. There was a difference, and Marlon understood it immediately. He pulled into a quiet roadside turnout just after sunrise and shut off the engine. The sudden stillness made his pulse feel louder. He stepped out, the cold air biting his face, and scanned the horizon. Nothing looked wrong. That was the problem. Threats like this didn't announce themselves. They arrived through paperwork, scheduling changes, quiet approvals, and conversations you were never invited into. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Darius Monroe, an agent who had survived 3 decades by never choosing sides too early. Darius didn't ask how he was. He told him the truth. Studios were coordinating, not officially, quietly. Roles were being reassigned, insurance clauses rewritten. The word unreliable was circulating again, polished and professional, stripped of emotion. Once that word stuck, it spread fast. Marlon leaned against the car and closed his eyes. He thought of men he had watched disappear this way, actors whose names once filled marquees, later reduced to trivia. No confrontation, no final argument, just absence. He had always believed his refusal to bend made him untouchable. Now he saw the cost of that belief. Independence inspired admiration until it became inconvenient. He opened the trunk and removed a small suitcase he didn't remember packing. Inside were papers, notes, personal items he hadn't meant to carry with him. Evidence of a life lived without contingency. He realized then how exposed he truly was. Not to scandal, to erasure. Another call came through, this one from a man named Walter Green, a former studio executive who spoke rarely and listened constantly. Walter warned him not to attend the meeting scheduled for the following morning. Someone wanted him there for a reason that had nothing to do with reconciliation. Silence followed that statement, heavy and deliberate. Walter didn't explain further. He didn't need to. Marlon looked back toward the road. He could turn around, face whatever waited, and let history decide the outcome. Or he could move forward, step outside the reach of rooms that had decided his value without him present. Neither choice felt safe. One felt final. He climbed back into the car and started the engine again, aware that every mile now mattered. This was no longer about pride or legacy. It was about control, timing, and whether he would be present when decisions were made about his future. As the road narrowed and the city disappeared behind him, Marlon Brando understood that the next choice would define everything that followed, and the people moving against him were counting on hesitation. By the time the sun began to lower, Marlon Brando had crossed into a place where phone signals weakened and intentions sharpened. The road narrowed, the traffic thinned, and with every mile, the pressure shifted. What had started as exclusion had revealed itself as something colder. This was not about correcting behavior or repairing relationships. It was about removing uncertainty. Men like Marlon made institutions nervous because they reminded everyone that control was never absolute. He pulled over once more, not out of fear, but clarity. Lorraine's warning, Darius's confirmation, Walter's silence, they formed a pattern too clean to ignore. The industry he had challenged for decades was not angry with him. It was finished negotiating. He understood now why so many before him had vanished quietly. Not destroyed, forgotten, that was the real threat, to continue living while being written out. Marlon sat there with the engine off, the quiet thick around him, and made a decision that felt heavier than any role he had ever accepted. He would not chase them. He would not attend meetings designed to corner him. He would not plead for relevance. If they wanted distance, he would choose it on his own terms. Power did not belong only to those who scheduled the rooms. It also belonged to the ones who refused to enter them. As night settled, he turned the car around and drove deeper into isolation, not retreating, but repositioning. The man who once filled theaters was stepping beyond reach, carrying nothing but his name and the truth of what he had lived. History would debate the outcome. Some would call it disappearance. Others would call it decline. None of them would understand the moment it happened, because this was not the end of Marlon Brando's story. It was the point where the world lost access to it, and what followed would be quieter, stranger, and more revealing than anyone expected. If you want to hear what happened next, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story. Share your thoughts in the comments, because stories like this aren't just about legends. They're about choice, consequence, and the moments that decide who controls the ending.